There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Most companies measure engagement, and they do that at least once a year. And if you're more senior in the organization, you probably get a fairly personalized report about how engaged your business area is. And if you're like most leaders that I talk to, then you worry about what you're going to do to bring those engagement scores up. Kind of seeing that as a bit of a proxy for how strong the culture is and how much effort people are really putting in and how happy they are and how happy they're like to stay. And who knows what all else goes through your thinking and what is in your personal measures of engagement. But I want to pose a question today, which is, what if we're measuring the wrong thing? What if there's a better way to understand the strength, the ability of your team to perform? And what we're going to talk about is a different approach. Now, before you say anything, one that's doable and that's doable at a local or a micro level, meaning you can do it all on your own. And one that I believe is actually really a stronger measure of having a vibrant, high-performing culture. Plus, by the way, it's going to be something you can immediately action. So that's the tease for today, and that's what we're going to cover. My guest is Dr. Theresa Welbourne. She is the Will and Maggie Brooke Professor in Entrepreneurship and the Executive Director of the Alabama Entrepreneurship Institute, which is in the Culver House College of Business at the University of Alabama. Mine is that a lot of words to get out there. So Theresa consults with organizations that are interested in optimizing human capital to drive innovation and growth. And she uses a very data-driven approach to help leaders know how to respond in rapidly changing circumstances and times so that they're avoiding dips in productivity and performance. She's also the founder, president, and CEO of a company called EE Pulse Incorporated, which is a human capital technology and consulting firm. Theresa's work has been featured in all the usual places: Inc. magazine, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Business Week, New York Times, Entrepreneurship magazine, and she has a host of peer-reviewed journal publications documenting this research as well as a number of books. The list could go on, but Theresa, it's delighted to be talking to you today.
Thanks, and I really appreciate being invited to be on your show, and look forward to our conversation today.
I'm thrilled because, as you know, I followed your work for a number of years, so I think this is fantastic. So let's start at the top. I know you are passionate about improving engagement in organizations, and that you've done a ton of research on this topic and a few others as well. What drives your interest in studying engagement?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've actually been doing this work for quite some time, and I got interested when I first began my career. I started out working in Boulder, Colorado, with some technology companies. And as you might know about the high-tech industry, the companies live and die fairly quickly. So, again, I'm just observing this as a very young, beginning of my career, but I was interested in why. What made the difference between a company that was, rocket made it really successful and one that seemed to have as good a product but went out of business? So that was on my mind. And what I did just from some of my own work and before I got my PhD, made the observation that I thought it was all about how they manage their people. And I have a long story about that I won't necessarily share, but I was with a technology company that grew very quickly and died. So within my own company, I saw it happen. And it was very much a function of leadership, something you do a lot of work on, and people. So with that, I decided, at some point to get my PhD and then start a research program. And I started doing my research on technology companies, looking at what made some successful, worked with a lot of leaders. And what I found out was I confirmed with data that it was all about the people, but not what I initially expected. So there were some other aspects of the people management that I found that I have been continuing to work on since then.
All right. I got that. You just teased that beautifully. I've got to hear it all the way through. So what were you expecting? And then what did you find in short? Like, I don't want the whole 20-year journey.
Yeah, I think that, again, my job in the tech companies was in the HR area. So sort of brought up in HR, getting my undergrad. This was before my PhD in HR. A lot of what we do is about taking care of people. I mean, I think that's how I thought of it and how people characterized it. We value people, we come up with programs for them. But when I started working with the technology companies, it was less about taking care of people and it was more about pushing people. So it was, the companies that lived had a very high sense of urgency. The CEOs were so committed to their people, but it wasn't about just finding ways to, be fair and treat them nice. It was about pushing them to get to the next level and having them really be part of the company. So to me, that was, you talked about engagement. It was about people, but it wasn't about engagement.
So I think this will resonate with every manager out there, particularly if you're working with younger employees who everybody is saying to me, they just feel like they're not willing to push themselves the way I want them to go. Now, maybe that's unrealistic expectations. Maybe we're not doing a good job of managing. Maybe we need to learn how to push.
Yeah, and I think that's what I saw in those companies. But the push was, again, you can't push people so far that they'll be burned out and want to leave, but push them to the point where they know that they can excel. And that's where the energy concept came from. It was something different from engagement. What I found is this conversation of engagement, it really, to me, is about it's passive. So what I found in my own research was people could be really engaged in not doing much. So you get this great engagement score, but you don't get high performance. And what I saw in these tech companies and that research was they were able to, again, maybe incentivize, that's not the right word. I keep going back to push, to energize their employees, to be part of a team, to push themselves, and then reward them when they were able to push themselves to the point where they really made a contribution, but not pushing them so far where they're burned out. So there was an interesting dynamic. And I think the young people enjoy that too. So I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs. And at first they all kind of have that imposter syndrome where they think they can't do it. And then we get them to the point where they can do it. And boy, they do. We've had some great successes because they build their confidence and they're not afraid to take a risk. So again, I don't want to treat employees with this passive and expect these more passive outcomes. I want to push them. I want to energize them. It's kind of like I talk about energy, like being on your treadmill and getting to the point where you're at your best. You're really at your best. You're burning calories, but you're not using up oxygen to the point where you're going to fall over and pass out.
All right. So again, like every other thing in leadership, you're talking about a balancing act. We want great performance. We want people to be inspired. We want people to achieve more than they believe they could achieve. We don't want to burn them out. But there's a balance in there between what I do as a leader to get that optimal level. And we know optimal performance comes when there's a little bit of stress, but not too much stress. So, all right, and you call that energy. I like that. All right, now I have the question of, I guess I should ask you to define that. Do you have a concrete definition on what energy is?
I do, and I take it from physics. So if you look at physics, energy is the ability to do work. Now, when you think about work, it's not just work at the job, but it's work at home. So you have to have this internal force that keeps you pumped up and keeps you, just like your car, it keeps you energized to be able to do the things you need to do.
That's, I often talk about sustaining your energy levels through the day, doing actions that allow your energy to recharge, to come back up so that you're not having that big slump at the end of the day or burning late into the evening and taking twice as long, 5 times as long to get a task done. I think it's the same that you're talking about. How do I keep a more sustained energy level?
It is. And then I think one of the issues then that once we understood what it was we wanted to understand and study, then the second question was, how do we measure it, right?
Yeah.
And so that individuals can see how they're doing as well as the organizations.
Okay. All right. So how do you measure it? And then I'm going to ask you, how does this affect performance? But okay, start with how do you measure it?
And that was a journey also. So, academics, we like to have a lot of data. So my first version of measuring it involved big, long surveys. I mean, with 200 questions because I was being my best academic self. And I had some really good results, but the CEOs I was working with, again, these are technology, fast growth companies. I also did the work in some larger companies. But when it came to those tech leaders, they said, Theresa, we love you, but if you give us another long survey, we're just not going to work with you. So I took that very seriously. And but I did have my 200 questions, so I could analyze that data. Then I came up with a very simple way to assess energy. So again, so just to give you, you talked about optimization. I think that's really important because energy is an optimization scale. And that's one thing we learned. So I'm going to go back to that treadmill example. Your doctor would not tell you, so you want to get in shape, what you should do is go run on the treadmill as fast as you can, as long as you can, because then you're likely to have a heart attack. They look at your age, your weight, what kind of shape you're in, and they give you an optimization. You have a zone. Keep your heart rate in this target zone. That's what you have to do with your energy at work also. So knowing that, what we did was developed a construct and that is measured on a 0 to 10 scale. So if you look at the way we do it, we've got this little donut and you go around the scale from low energy to medium high. And then you can have this area where you're overly stimulated. It's kind of like being on that treadmill going too high, but 10 is not the right answer. So 0 to 10, 9, 10 is where you're at risk of burnout. So we created this optimization scale, and then we asked people 3 questions. What's your energy now? What's the energy level where you're at your best or most productive? And then a comment question, where we ask them, what's affecting your energy? So the way that it predicts outcomes, which is, I know one of your questions, is the gap between where you are today and where you're at your best. So if the gap is more than 1 point, we find that has very negative consequences on performance. So, and the other thing that's interesting about that is that where people are at their best is different by occupation and by country. But that makes sense, right? It's just like, because we always look at measures in the field of management, and we think a 5 is always best. Really? Why? And I think what we found with this is energy being optimized. We know from the data, and I have over 100,000 data points from countries around the world, and optimization is what really predicts outcomes.
So it makes sense to me, somebody who's doing, for example, programming. So it's deep concentration work. It's you in front of your screen. It's kind of making sure that everything is tied together in very complex ways. If you're overly stimulated on that one, you're going to make mistakes. And if you're not really focused or really energized, you're going to make mistakes or take too long. So it makes sense to me that would be a very particular kind of energy level. Whereas if I'm in sales and I'm out in the field, I would imagine it takes a higher level of energy because that's what's going to engage with at least some of my clients. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. So from the data that we've collected, what we usually see is for those programmers, the optimal energy level is about a 6 on the 0 to 10 scale. And for salespeople, it's close to a 9. And they will tell you why. It's just what you said. The programmers say, I've got to concentrate. I can't get disrupted. And the salespeople are saying, I got to stay really up because I get a lot of rejections during the day. And I've got to be able to work around that. And it takes a while for people to get in the groove, for a 70s term, I think, and understand where they're at their best. But I think the individual employee learning in this is as important as what the organization gets out of it.
Okay. All right. So how about countries? What are the differences you find between countries or geographies?
Okay, so you're a very international person, so I'm just going to put you on the spot. Which country do you think has the lowest optimal energy?
I would guess that is an Asian country, without speculating which.
Okay, so I'll give you what our data shows, and I'm not being, offensive to anybody, but the highest one is the U.S. I think it's because we think we should be higher. Like, it really does take a couple weeks for people to get realistic on this measure. But the lowest I've seen so far is in Italy.
Really?
And having spent some time there, I think it's the great wine they drink at lunch.
Okay, there are other places too. I guess, it sort of depends upon what you think about what else is going on in your life and the value of what else is going on in your life. It's interesting. I would not have guessed Italy, though. I have to admit, even having done a bunch of work there, I wouldn't have guessed that. Okay, cool. All right, so we have different people who have different energy levels. We have different occupations that have different energy levels. We have different countries, regions, geographies that have different energy levels, and suppose there are all sorts of other ones. Now, how does this optimal energy then tie to performance? What's the mechanism that happens there?
Yeah, so one thing I want to mention is you mentioned all those different, optimal levels. It doesn't matter because where you're optimal isn't what predicts, it's the gap between where you are today and your optimal level. So it's okay to have all these differences, and potentially differences in different points in your career. So what we do is we look at, again, the gap between where they are and where they're at their best, and we take the that number and we look at how that predicts outcomes. And all of our research is longitudinal. So I'm looking at time 1 to time 2, and then how that predicts time 2 or time 3 performance. We're looking over time. The other thing we've looked at is the swings overall. So in addition to the gap between those two numbers being important, the standard deviation over time is also a predictor. So big swings in your energy is a bad thing. So getting to the point where you're at your best and minimizing variance is good. Now, in terms of the kinds of outcomes we've studied, there's a lot of them. So I like working with sales teams because it's so easy to get an agreeable outcome variable. So we can look at the change in their sales. And the closer you get them to their optimal, the less variance. We've had up to like a $150,000 per quarter increase in sales. And that was a high percentage of what they were doing. Or in hospitals, we look at the data predicting patient satisfaction scores. It predicts unwanted turnover. It also predicts, we've looked at safety in manufacturing. So again, being able to be at your best and thinking about your programmer example, anything that makes you uncomfortable, makes you not think as well, like if you're overdoing it, is important. So to be safe, you have to be in your zone or the closer. We've looked at performance appraisal scores and data, and then I've even taken the data to an aggregate company level and seen that at the corporate level, it predicts things like stock price growth and company survival.
Wow. Company survival. So we're right back to your tech examples that you started with.
It is, yeah. Yes.
Get the optimal energy right, and you're more likely to survive, more likely to have great stock performance, more likely to have better safety records, more likely to have higher sales. Wow. Okay, we've got a pretty good one. Now, we started with engagement. How does energy tie to engagement, or does it?
Yeah, I think there are, like when I'm doing research, there's correlations between energy, the way we measure energy and engagement. The thing I find is that engagement will predict retention, but I don't see engagement predicting performance. So again, the risk, so I'm not saying engagement's a bad thing, but I think it's suboptimal if you're really trying to have a high performing company. Because what you will get if you maximize all those engagement scores is people who stay, but are staying and not necessarily your highest performers.
Okay. All right. So I'm very engaged. I'm enjoying the work. It's a great atmosphere, but I'm not necessarily performing. If I want to look at performance, I got to look at energy. I want to look at optimizing performance. I've got to look at energy. And I look at energy by looking at a 10-point scale. What's your energy levels now? What's your energy level when you're at your best? And I'm looking at the gap between now to your best measure, regardless what that number is for you. And I'm also looking at the swings over time, the highs, big high, big low. That big swing is going to hurt performance.
Yeah, and you reminded me of one more thing. So from a company or a manager point of view, looking at the data, what you're looking at is the dips, right? The dips and the highs. And so recovery becomes really important. Knowing if there's a big dip in your group, what is it from? Now, I've had some managers tell me, well, Theresa, my data went down this week, but you know what? A bunch of people were out with flu. So that's not fair. Okay, I think because managers think of it as a performance appraisal on them. And the reality is, yes, it went down. Yes, people were out with the flu, and yes, you're going to be less productive this week because they're not, because they're sick. So you really got to teach managers that what's happening, it's fine. Or sometimes it goes down because, let's say, the CEO quit or you did a layoff. So you'll see those big dips, but teaching managers how to recover quickly and knowing that it went down is important because most of the time they don't know. Because measuring energy, and I forgot to say this, you have to do it more frequently. You can't do it just once a year. So we're talking about doing this weekly, monthly, at least, because you're again looking for the fluctuation, just like you would with sales data or finance data. But for some reason, we think we can get all we need just once a year with employees, and you can't if you're really trying to drive performance.
All right, so engagement surveys. One of the things that I find about engagement surveys is there's too much time between the collecting of the data and the getting of the information. And as we said earlier, it happens only once a year at most, maybe twice a year, but that's not regularly enough for all the highs and lows that happen in the course. And then the worst case is it's 6 months, maybe it's 4 months if you're lucky, between the survey and getting the results, by which thing everything in the company has changed. The marketplace has changed, the customers have changed, the employees have often changed, and how do I then know as a manager what I'm supposed to do about it? And what I find managers then do is to say, right, I got to get my engagement surveys up, so they run some event, like a company party or an event, or tell everybody, give me good. I mean, none of that is helping anybody take any action.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's partly what led to my interest in not just learning what energy is, but developing technology to be able to do surveys differently. Like, so the business that you mentioned we have, EE Pulse, we were the first company ever to do employee pulse surveys. And it was built to commercialize the research that I was doing on energy, because somehow I had to be able to collect this data. I mean, we were collecting it weekly way back in the late 1990s, and then had to figure out how to change the structure that the companies I was changing so that managers get reports that reflect who's with them now versus who was there before. But it was all about like getting your data in real time so you can take actions immediately. And so the interesting thing though is I think there's something to that. Some companies don't really want their employee data more frequently.
As in they don't want to know?
That's a leadership question.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave that one. I'll get in trouble for talking about that one. So in these, in your energy surveys, you ask people energy now, energy at your best, and then a comment, like what's affecting your energy level. What do you do with the comments? Why are those useful?
Yeah, that's actually the secret sauce in the looking at the data and trying to help managers take action, because it's they're talking about things that can be improved upon, and that's really important. Now, some of the things that that employees will tell us, "Hey, I'm writing this comment, but I realize it's my responsibility." So some of it is they're just journaling, which is important. They're reflecting on their day, but a lot of it is messages they want to share with the company about what's not working. And so many, when I look at that data, a lot of it's very small things. I mean, some of them are big issues, but a lot of it's small. But when you fix the small things, it makes people more productive. It also gives them a feeling that you're listening, which is important. I remember the first time I was meeting with, in one of our first engagements, I had a meeting after 6 months with the CEO of the company. And I was so excited because we also ask people how much money they've saved, and we do some ROI analysis. So I had this big number, like, they saved $6 million with a very small investment. And then I also printed out all the comment data and I put it into a book that I gave to the CEO. So I thought the CEO was going to be so thrilled with my ROI and this big number, but instead he just took that book and was looking at all the comments, the things that were working and not working. And that's what really made a difference, was hearing the words of the employees talking about what could be done. And some of the small things where they might like say, hey, our printer on our floor doesn't work. I have to go 3 floors up, and that wastes 10 minutes of my time. Again, you might say that's silly, but also they have ideas about improving quality and innovation, et cetera. So in a way, what we're doing is blending an accurate measurement of employee energy with an innovation system, which can really, again, be helpful for high performance.
Well, we know about human behavior, any rate, that it's all the little micro things that add up that make you like so angry at the end. What's wrong with this company and why won't they ever fix anything? And it's just that the printer doesn't work, or that there's never any ink, or that whatever, the lists don't work. I mean, I hear all sorts of complaints. And it's all those things where the company doesn't join together that I think is just, and those are the small things. And I can imagine CEOs would love to hear those sorts of comments. But now for a manager looking through that, that's a lot of comments to read on a weekly basis. Do you synthesize that in some way?
Yeah, again, we've used technology for a long time to organize the data and code the data. So we have that. The thing that we've done recently, though, that I think probably works better than even having the data coded, is we've added something called an ambassador program. So what the problem I was trying to solve was managers' hatred of employee surveys. So maybe hate's a strong word, but they just really don't like them. I mean, because again, they're saying, hey, you're gonna get this data from my employees, and it's giving me like a grade, and I don't feel like it's fair. So what I thought is what I'm really giving them is data to help improve, but they just weren't going to believe it. So we said, instead of giving you the data and making you responsible, we want you to assign 1 or 2 ambassadors from your group, people who are interested in learning about management, people who are interested in continuous improvement, and they're going to be ambassadors. So once you're done with the data, the ambassadors run around to the employees and say, because employees have access to their own data, look at your data and tell me what you think we can do to improve. So what the ambassadors have to do is work with employees to come up with 3 suggestions that they'll give to the manager. So now the manager has somebody working for them who helps them figure out not just what the data means, but what to do about the data.
What to do about it, yeah.
And that, I think, has been working really well.
Fantastic. I think that's what managers want. They want to know, what action do I need to take, not who's complaining to me one more time about something I can't fix. All right, so what kind of actions have you seen that managers can take that help improve the optimal energy levels of their employees?
Yeah, so I go to so there's a lot of different tactical actions. I think the biggest action and the most consistent is just letting the employees know you're listening. So just give you one of my favorite examples. This is kind of from my early days. I was working with a company. We were doing weekly data collection, and one of the VPs said, he showed me his data and said, hey, Theresa, look at this thing's going down. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I said, okay, well, here's my magic solution. Print out that graph and then get your employees together and show them the graphic showing it going down and ask them why. So he did that. He didn't really want to do it, but he did that. And then the next week, the data went up, and it stayed up for a while. And then it started ticking down. And he called me again and said, hey, it's going down again. What's the deal? And I said, well, have you continued talking to your employees? He's like, no, I really don't like talking to my employees. So he self-reflected and said, you know what? I don't really like this. So I think I shouldn't be a VP anymore. Or at least I can be a VP, but not have people report to me. And he asked the CEO to change his job. I see that as a big success, because I think part of what we're doing with this frequent measurement is being able to use it to feed back to employees and come up with solutions. And even if you don't have an action, it's because it's like, I'm listening, I'm here, and talking about, it gives you a heads up to talk about what's going on. And when it's a group score, people will talk about a score versus talking about me personally. So I think that works. And then again, there's all these other things like, yeah, go buy a printer for $200 and put it on the floor. So there's a lot of tactical things in addition to that.
Yeah, we're back to the small things that are going to make a difference. And you're right. People, a lot of times I can imagine the comments, people are complaining about their own frustration with something that they know their manager can't actually really fix. But it's nice to be able to vent it. And then to have a manager just say, yeah, I see that. Got suggestions, as opposed to it's one more thing I, as a manager, have to take on and do something about.
Yeah, and their comments will be long comments, and then in the end they're saying, thank you for listening. I don't really expect anybody to do anything about this. So okay. It is a journaling exercise, I think, for employees too, which is important.
All right. So then that begs the question, what do you see individuals do that helps keep their energy at optimal levels?
Yeah, so I did an experiment during COVID. So again, I've been doing this since the late 1990s, this measurement work, and people have often said to me, "Why don't you do this on a daily basis?" And I thought, "Oh, that's just too much, right?" But during COVID, I thought maybe this is the time to try. So I started something called the Daily Energy Pulse, and we actually have it on our website, and it's free if anybody wanted to test it out. But we asked a couple companies, and then I had all my students taking their daily energy, and from that what I was able to put together was a model that looks at what people start to do to improve their energy. So when you look at the model, it kind of feels like a new version of Maslow's needs hierarchy. Because they start out in the first couple of weeks, what I found is they're talking about things like, well, I was energized on a sunny day, but on a cloudy day I wasn't. It was like really just little tidbits of obvious things. I went into my refrigerator, I didn't have any milk, or I had too much alcohol last night. Definitely that's on the students' comments. So
Some of the adults' comments too. Just
yeah, I have this like concentric circles that I use to describe it. But you start with these things that are close to you, that are obvious, and then next they move to things that are like relational in nature. So what I found is that I was really missing my parents, and I decided to start calling them once a week. Or I'm making up with somebody I've been fighting with for 10 years. And then they eventually get to work related things. And there's about 6 things in it, so I'm doing a short version of it. But at the very end, the thing after they've gone through all the things that affect their own energy and made changes, my physical, I'm exercising more because I know that I'm just not in shape. The very last one is they start doing things to energize other people, which I think, and that they're saying is what really energizes them. So when I can have a positive effect on somebody else, and then the other thing is it's different from Maslow's needs hierarchy. Is at the end you're not just kind of all done and forget, but they start swinging back in. Okay, now that I learned energizing people's helping me, oh, there's other things I can do for myself because I'm helping people do that. So we see them go back and forth, but it does seem like there's a learning curve, and I think the ability to, again, impact other people has been really important. And that's building community, which is key to our personal success also.
Right. All right. So it's all the stuff that we've known all along that's going to help us be at optimal energy. So the personal hygiene things like sleeping well and eating well and exercising, all of that stuff that we know keeps us mentally fit and mentally strong, also keeps our energy level. But then finding the places that bring you enjoyment, whether that's connecting with people or helping other people energize their energy or whatever that is, that more sort of a personal thing is a piece of it. And I'm sure it gets quite particular for each individual what works for each of them. Okay. That's an encouraging story, Theresa, because it gives us a way of beginning to know, how am I doing on my own life journey? And what do I need to do differently to feel good about my life journey, my work journey, my school journey, my career journey, whatever those all are. And that also then informs what it is I ultimately need a manager to do to help me optimize that.
Yeah, and I'd probably add one more thing. When we work with companies, we will supplement the comment data with other questions. So you read the comments, then you have questions based on the comments, right? We can put those into the next cycle because I'm not waiting a year. I mean, you can also get people in a room and talk to them, but if you want, and what I've seen is the other thing we've learned is that those kinds of questions, I mean, a lot of time the questions come from academics, they come from consultants, they're based on questions other people want to solve, but the questions you write in surveys also influence the people who are reading the survey questions. So being really thoughtful about what you want people to think about, and being very open to saying this is an influence question, not just a question I need an answer to, can really help shape the environment too. So that's something managers and the people running this kind of survey work can do to really help the organization.
Great. Theresa, I love the concept. I loved it the first time I heard it. I love it now even more. It makes so much sense that we should be thinking, if I'm looking at a team or a part of an organization and I want optimal performance, then I need to look at the energy levels of my employees, and not just raw energy on a scale of 1 to 10. I need to look at the gap between where people report their energy today and what is optimal for that person. And I want to try to avoid big swings. There's always some swings, but I want to avoid big swings. And then I want both the individual taking action that's going to put them at their optimal energy level more consistently. And I want to look at any big, often small trends that I can do within my own business area that's going to keep everybody at a more optimal level. Frequently, very tiny little things that make employees feel heard is, at the end of the day, I think what the story is. Theresa, what a great concept, great set of ideas. If people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to reach you?
Sure. Probably my email. So it's Theresa, Theresa, and then like elephant, pulse.com, eepulse.com. Then they can also go to the eepulse.com website. We also have a website for the Leadership Pulse, which is a quarterly survey we do at no cost, where we collect data from leaders and share what we learn on timely topics. And there's also a site called whatsmyenergy.com. If you want to take a test drive of the energy metric, you can take a look at that. And there's contact information in all those sites.
Great. I love it, Theresa. What a great conversation. What a great research project. I love it. And thank you for joining us.
Yes, and thank you so much for your perspectives on it, Wanda. It's been great to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise. More to come. I think it's exciting work. All right, and join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. Certainly give us a comment. We'd love to hear from you on any of your favorite podcast platforms, or go to our website, outofthecomfortzone.com, and leave a comment there. Speak to you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.